Hey, warm for the Evo! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Heaps with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in segment number 2 by our good friend Tristan Freeman. He does such great work over at Bus and Brackets. He's out there in the state of Pennsylvania, more specifically Pittsburgh. So we're going to be looking at the Panthers and their outlook. We're also going to be looking at Duquesne. They've had a very interesting offseason. They're in a fun conference in the Atlantic 10 where I think that things are going to be so fascinating in general. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about the fallout that has happened at Memphis with so many staff members getting canned, and we're just going to have a great chat for about 14-15 minutes on this great game of basketball. Did not really get a lot of news in college basketball on Monday, so I do encourage you for me to do my best to be able to get you set for the upcoming season. Let me know what you want to hear on this podcast. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we have fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Junit_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I would always encourage a Twitter/X feed because that's the best place. And if you send them into the DMs, well, my DM is just an abyss of a whole bunch of places where people are asking, oh, how do you grade out this 18 parlay and everything like that? And I get a whole bunch of spam. So please do send those into the timeline. But when it comes to taking a look at this great game of college basketball, I was alluding to it just a little bit before, the fact that the Atlantic 10 should be some fun. I do think that there's two clear top teams in Dayton along with VCU, but maybe this is just me doing my evaluations coming into the season because there's a few of these mid-major conferences like the Southland should be run by McNeese. You should be seeing dominance once again from Gonzaga out there in the WCC. There's a few of those conferences, but it feels like if you do your research on the little things this offseason, if you take a look at how travel is going to be affecting these teams, scheduling spots, I think that is going to be more important than ever, because if you look at like Bart Torvik's rankings of the Big Ten, and I'm not someone that is like copying Bart Torvik or KenPom rankings or anything like that, I do it all myself, but if you look at those sorts of rankings in the Big Ten, like you don't have a single top 10 team, and you don't really have a team that's outside of number 75. We're actually going to be alluding to one or two Big Ten teams with Tristan in the next segment, but I think that is going to put more of a premium this year, especially with so much movement, with conference realignment, with so many things being jumbled up with these conference schedules, to where if you handicap the spot itself, it's really going to be to your advantage, and you always want to have like your base level numbers with regards to teams. You want to be having sort of what we always call power ranking, and there are great handicappers that do amazing work with it, but I don't think that you should just be reading off of a spreadsheet every single time as well, and I don't think that you can have just a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to taking a look at these games. Like when I am on this podcast during the regular season breaking down games, for those of you guys that listen to this podcast, you know that I utilize these two phrases. Every game is its own living, breathing entity, and matchups make fights. And I think that is very much going to be the case this season, with so many conferences having so many teams, especially the middle, and so many of these conferences being so jammed up. And the difference could be having to make a road trip out to Colorado if you're in West Virginia. The difference could be having to go from east to west if you're Rutgers playing against a team out there on the West Coast, something like that. So I do think that is so important for this upcoming season, and something that you should be very much looking into as you get set for the upcoming season. And this man is doing an amazing job getting set for the upcoming season. Tristan Freeman, who does such amazing work over at Bus and Brackets, he joins me next right here on Coast to Coast Heaps with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Heaps with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It is great to be joined by this man, as he is a wealth of college basketball knowledge. We've got Tristan Freeman aboard. He does such great work over at Fansided's hub for college basketball coverage, Bus and Brackets. On top of that, he's doing great work with Sleepers Media, with Carter Elliott, Greg Waddell, helping them out, the Field of 68, and so much more. He's based out there in the great state of Pennsylvania. Does a great job covering that landscape and so much more, as you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at HoopsOn351 all together. And it's always a pleasure, Tristan. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Greg.
Thank you for joining me, Tristan. And Tristan, I want to get your thoughts on but it's been a very intriguing situation that we saw brew about a week or so ago with Memphis laying off 4 different staff members, and that means that they've went through 8 different staff members this offseason. It has been wild to say the least. And just what is your overall outlook on a Memphis team that on paper I think that they should be able to run the American, but I've got great question marks now that all this has arisen, and just in general, the way that in the past with Memphis, they just seemingly have done a little bit less with more under Penny Hardaway.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that they were supposed to run the American last year with an even more talented roster compared to this one, and things just went bad for them. And it's just, there's always just something going on in Memphis. I mean, you had the roster turnover, which was expected. You had the David Jones saga where you didn't know if he was coming back from the draft or not. And now every other program has their staff turnover done in April. But to have it done in September is insane. You have coaches who supposedly played a part in recruiting the guys, and you're trying to build some kind of team chemistry and camaraderie, and you're pretty much starting over with a different staff, bringing in guys like Nolan Smith and former Detroit coach Mike Davis, and who knows what impact they're going to have. But the fact that they just can never have anything normal happen for once is probably playing into why they continuously underachieve. And it's just hard to be overly optimistic about them as a national contender, let alone what they can do in the AAC, because there still are going to be some decent competition.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that they should be the top team out there in the American, but I'm not sure if you've gathered the same thing, but it feels like it's time and time again with Memphis, a case where it's always the mental mistakes and just the errors out there on the field in terms of things like turnovers that have been so costly for them. Because I still remember 2 years ago where they lose that game to Florida Atlantic, and who knows how this program is looking if they get that timeout called. I still remember that was one of the craziest round of 64 games. I was very much of the thought that whoever was going to win that game was going to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. Lo and behold, Florida Atlantic makes it to the Final Four. But really, other than when they brought in Kendrick Davis, who was a tried and true point guard, a guy that was able to be essentially another coach out there on the field while also being the top player out there as well, it is a team that they make a lot of critical mistakes. And that's what my fear is once again this year with a team that is made up fully of transfers, and they need to be coached up and they need to gain a little bit of chemistry that I'm just not sure that they're going to get.
Yeah, and they have Tyrese Hunter, who's the one proven power conference guy coming over from Texas. He was good, but not necessarily great for them. It'll be interesting to see if he can be the best player on a top 25 caliber team. You have Haggerty, who averaged 20 a game as a redshirt freshman at Tulsa, but they didn't necessarily do much. So is he going to be able to produce the same kind of results? And more importantly, can they win? And then, you bring back Musa Cisse from Ole Miss, who was a former Memphis player not too long ago. It's a solid roster, but I'm not sure if it's top 25 good. And that's where the expectations is when you have a program with the resources that Memphis has and Penny Hardaway can coach. I don't think that's the issue. I just think if he can have a normal locker room and a normal culture, that would be great for them. But that just seems to be something that just doesn't work out for them one reason or another.
Yep, it's been what I've been saying about Memphis for quite some time. Doing less with more because he does such a great job bringing in this talent. I don't know if there's anyone else that'd be willing to take this Memphis job that would be able to do a better job in terms of recruiting. Obviously, he's got all the accolades in terms of what he's done as a player, but off there on the court just hasn't necessarily translated into a bunch of wins and sustained NCAA tournament runs. As we do have Tristan Freeman, he does absolutely amazing work over at Boston Brackets, and he is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I do think that it is also going to be interesting as well what we see in your neck of the woods, because I'm doing my prep work, getting set for the upcoming college basketball season, and there's 2 teams that you cover very well in Duquesne along with Pittsburgh that I think are going to be so interesting, and do want to get your thoughts on them. And we'll lead off with Duquesne because I've just been doing my deep dive on them with Keith Dambrot stepping down as the coach of this team, and I actually like the way that they've been able to just cobble things together here in the offseason, for lack of a better term. I thought that they did a really nice job in terms of hiring on Drew Joyce III. If I'm not mistaken, he actually played with LeBron James out in high school. But how do you take a look at a Duquesne team that it feels like they're in an Atlantic 10 that after Dayton, after VCU, it's relatively wide open, and they bring in some relatively talented guys like Trey Dinkins, Maximus Edwards, and Alex Williams, I think are all really good fits with what Drew Joyce has as a vision for this program.
Yeah, the roster, if you look at it from the outside, is really unique because they lost over 80% of their production, but still bring back 6 guys that got minutes from them last year, and then bring in another 5 or 6 transfers who all played meaningful roles or were starters at their previous stop. You mentioned Dinkins from Canisius, who was a point guard. Deshaun Corbett averaged 15 a game at Chicago State. Pretty solid group of guys who are proven performers that should be able to play at the A10 level. And then when you look at who they bring back, you're going to have a healthy Dave Dixon, who was injured for parts of last year, but was a very dynamic two-way big man. Tu Sharansky, who's a talented European player, along with Jakob Nechas, who was the leading scorer in the under-20 European tournament for the Czech Republic. So there's a lot of pieces to like for them. I think everyone has them in the middle as a team that has talent, but still a lot of questions as to how it'll work out, which is understandable. But I do think that they have a fairly high ceiling if some of these pieces can break through.
Yep, I do as well, and especially out there in Atlantic 10, like I was alluding to, you've got a few top-flight teams, but then it does feel like there's a very big middle. It's been a conference that over the last few seasons, we haven't necessarily seen that one super-duper dominant team. That could be the case once again this year, so that's going to be a lot of fun. And then Pittsburgh out in an ACC where I think that Duke, North Carolina, once again, they're going to be able to run things, but then 3 on, and I am relatively high on Wake Forest, truth be told, but I look at the entire middle of that conference as well, and Pittsburgh is such an interesting team as well. A team that has had the pedigree of being able to win over the last 2 seasons under Jeff Capel. Capel under the microscope a little bit less this season because he was able to get that extension in the offseason, but I think such a fascinating team in that they lose their heart and soul player in Bub Carrington, but they have a lot down low, and I think that where they're really going to need to succeed this year is by being able to hit the glass and be able to win those battles on the post.
Yeah, you mentioned Carrington, the star freshman for Pitt, who ended up being a lottery pick. But another guy who was just as effective as a freshman was Jalen Lowe, who the team was at his best when he was inserted into a starting lineup. He's going to be one of the top breakout candidates to watch as he runs the offense. There's a lot of pieces to like. I think the 2 transfers, Damian Dunn and Cam Corrin, are power conference guys who, in larger roles, could be able to excel. And Zach Austin, a guy who I think could take a leap as a second-year transfer. He's a great athlete, a quality defender, and started to get his shot towards the end of last season. If he can take another step, then I think that this Pitt team could be a legit surprise team to watch in the AAC, and definitely one that can finish in the top half.
And how do you just take a look at that ACC landscape? Because I was alluding to it with having your top flight teams, Duke and North Carolina. And personally, I would put Wake Forest at number 3 if I had to seed things right now. But I look at that ACC with so many of these teams, like Louisville is an unknown, but we know that they bring in talent. They bring in a tremendous coach here in the offseason. I think is going to be able to take them to new heights. Clemson was able to make that deep run in the NCAA tournament last year, but we know that they lose quite a bit as well. SMU has pretty much poured $100 billion into all of their programs, and all of a sudden they've got quite a bit of talent as well. But I look at these teams as well, like a Notre Dame, I think is so intriguing as well. And with the ACC, I think that there's just going to be so many bubblicious teams this season that it's going to make it so interesting to take a look at that middle of the conference.
I think talent-wise, the clear third best team in the league would be Miami. But the same thing was said about them last year, and they ended up finishing, I believe, in the bottom 3 of the conference. So you sort of have to wait and see on them. But there's 4 or 5 teams, as you mentioned, that has the ceiling to being the third best team. I mean, Wake Forest brings back Hunter Salas and has several sophomore transfers, and you've seen how Steve Forbes does with talented players who join him from the portal. He can get them to break out. Louisville was impressive in the Bahamas preseason tournament, but we'll see how that ultimately works. And NC State had a solid portal run themselves. And then, even though they lose their top player, Reese Beekman, Tony Bennett in Virginia always is going to warrant respect because they still find a way to be competitive, although their roster does leave some things to be desired. So there's a lot of teams that can finish in the top 4 of this league. And as you mentioned, there's a good amount of depth, but there's still plenty of questions that we're going to have to see answer in the first few weeks of the season to see which of these teams are for real and who's going to be fighting out in the bottom tier.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that bottom tier in the ACC is going to be much better this year than it has been in the past. Do you think that still might be a little bit rough for a team like Boston College? Do have any question marks with Stanford, even though they made a really nice hire in the offseason with Kyle Smith? But again, season number one, sometimes it takes a little bit of time for these guys to be able to gel, and certainly the travel that Stanford's going to be going through, that's going to be something to watch for as well. But I do think that they were able to elevate there, as Tristan Freeman, who does such great work over at Boston Brackets, is joining me on Coast to Coast Soups. And Tristan, I know that you've been putting out a lot of great lists here in the offseason. You've got a lot of rankings, whether that be conference rankings, whether that be player rankings. You've been really stuffing the stat sheet here in the offseason, but just as you've been doing your research the last few weeks, has there been a team, it could be to the positive, it could be to the negative, it could just be in a fun aspect that has really been catching your attention, and just the more that you're looking at them, perhaps you're changing your tune on them coming into the upcoming season?
Yeah, I guess one team that's been talked about a little bit was Northwestern. They recently had their own foreign trip, and arguably their three best players were held out for injury reasons. But you saw some guys start to emerge. I mean, KJ Wyndham, freshman guard, could be someone that gets minutes for them. Jalen Leach, a transfer from Fairfield, is someone that could possibly start for them at point. And it's interesting because they made the tournament twice in a row, which is a record for them, first time ever. But they're without the guy who made it happen. You know, we saw our guy Terrence Ogilvie had them picked last in his Twitter rankings of the Big Ten, which raised some eyebrows. But there's still potential there. And assuming that Ty Berry and Brooks Barnheiser are healthy and ready to go, they could be a team that can fight for a third straight tournament bid. But we're going to have to see how it looks without Bowie taking all the attention.
Yeah, but I think that is going to be such an interesting team in a Big Ten where I talked about with Rocco Miller on this podcast about a week and a half ago. You've just got no team that I would say is in the top 10. If you have one, it's Purdue. And then really no team that's outside the top 75 as well. That's going to cause for a lot of parity, and you can take some stabs on some of these teams and you could be oh so right on them, or you could be oh so wrong on them, because the margins in that conference are going to be so slim. So I'm so glad that you bring up Northwestern and just what we're going to be seeing in the landscape of the Big Ten. And Tristan, you're doing such a great job getting set for the upcoming college basketball season. Your work is second to none over at Boston Brackets. I know that you're doing some help with the Field of 68, Sleepers Media, and so much more. So love the good people at home know it's all on tap for you, and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow me at Hoopsnut351 on Twitter/X. So you can also follow at Boston Brackets on Twitter/X, as well as our site at bostonbrackets.com. And like you said, we're just strictly in the preseason stuff. We have a coaching articles piece coming out Monday morning, ranking all 364 D1 coaches, and I think it might be a surprise who we got number one.
It's going to be a lot of fun to take a look at that as well, because with coaching, there is quite a bit of subjectivity. I think we can all agree that Danny Early at this point has formed himself into being a top 10 coach in all of college basketball. That would be quite a surprise if we don't see that, but those coaching rankings are always so interesting, as it's different strokes for different folks. But a man that I'm sure appeals to all folks is a great knowledge of Tristan Freeman. Always great to get him aboard. Big thanks to Tristan for joining me on Coast to Coast Soups, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Soups, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Junin_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Friendly reminder that conference previews, they are very much continuing on this podcast. We are down to 7 conference previews, so I'm not going to do one a day, or else we would have a month and a half until the start of the season where all the conference previews have already been done. I'll probably be doing one and a half a week, and we're down to the big boys. We're down to the Power 5 conferences along with the Atlantic 10 and the American, so be on the lookout for that. And again, please do send in those Twitter/X questions, so that way I know what you want to hear on this podcast, because I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast. Regular season, off season, rain, shine. I'm here all 366 days, and I'll be with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.